advancing as I'm talking about stuff to definitely let us know. All right, so what are we talking about today? Well, at a high level, we are talking about naming things, particularly files, folders, variable names that you'll be using as you get into the nuts and bolts of the projects that you're working on. And I've broken things up into two parts here. First, we're going to talk about naming things sort of more broadly, and slightly more of a almost conceptual level. And this information is based on a presentation by Jenny Bryan that she did for the Reproducible Science Workshop, with some modifications that I have added based on feedback I received from the DSPG fellows who already have been through a version of this talk. And then there's some stuff at the end when we actually get more into the coding standards or best practices that we'll be looking at based on some things that Hadley Wickham has written. So, very important first point here, names matter. Why is that? Well, we'll be getting to that in a minute. And so as you approach these projects, it is true that you can name things whatever you want. And if we were doing work on the continuum of the team science or team continuum that Rachel talked about yesterday, that where it was very individualized, very sort of self-driven, where it was just us on our own, you know, squirreled away somewhere, then this would be less important. But as we'll go through some examples, so I put up the most potentially topical reference that I'll have here, which is a screen grab from the show Friends. And now I realize Friends has actually been off the air for about, I think, 15 years at this point, but the previous version of this presentation had a reference to Cheers, which I'm not sure that anyone would really appreciate. So we've crept ahead by about a decade here. But just because you can name things whatever you want doesn't mean that you should. And the reason for that is because we're not operating in that environment of just us on our own doing things however we want. We're you know, working in concert with other people as part of a team science initiative. So I'm going to skip ahead to this. So for example, if you wanted to name all the files after your favorite band, for example, favorite band discography, I mean, that's great if it makes sense to you. But the question is, does it make sense to the rest of the people on your team? Are they going to be able to utilize these files in the same way as you are using the convention that you maybe have instituted? So as I've already alluded to, there's a context in which this work is occurring. And it is not individuals, it's a team. And what we do impacts your team. And beyond the idea of working with other people, it's also because, as you'll see as we move through the rest of the slides here, it's not that we're naming files just for fun. These files serve a purpose. The data captured there needs to be imported into other processes. It's going to be transformed. It's going to be analyzed. And so when you are putting stuff together, you can actually use the names of the files themselves to capture important information that will make the other things that you want to do with it easier and follow in a more logical pattern. And so what I'm going to keep coming back to, my refrain here, is that what you want to do with just about every step of the research project is take a little bit of time at the outset to think about what your goals are, what you're trying to accomplish, what kinds of transformations you're likely going to be performing on the data you're working with. make sure that everybody on your team is on the same page with that, that everybody is following the same kind of conventions, following the same kind of naming structure. And to the degree that you can get that shared understanding, shared vocabulary set up at the outset, that is going to make your life a whole lot easier down the road when you actually start to utilize this information. All right, so that is my high-level pitch for why this is important and sort of a general approach. But now let's talk a little bit about what are some actual sort of best practices in terms of how to name things. And I'm going to caution you through Thoughtful Skull. And why Thoughtful Skulls? Well, because I had a lot of skulls apparently in my image library. And so they made their way into this presentation. But what Thoughtful Skull is telling us here is that these are recommendations. They're not rules. They're not things that absolutely have to be followed to the letter. And again, as I just said in the previous slide, that's because you want to implement these within the context of the project and your specific goals and the way that your team has decided to integrate the information to make use of it. So there is a lag while the slide does not advance. That's no good. Let's see if the arrow key works. Also not good. There we go. All right, I think what has happened super inconveniently is that my mouse has just died. So set that off to the side. So here we have some examples of what I'm suggesting are generally not a good approach to naming some files, and what are good or better approaches to doing those files. And so my question for you guys is, what don't you like about the not good examples, and what is probably better when we look at the good approach there? So if you guys want to throw that stuff into the chat, or we could go free for all on the audio, and you can just start shouting it out there. Much more descriptive. Like it. Thanks, Granite. Straightforward. Okay, excellent. Dates. Nice. You guys are hitting on all the keys. All right. Yeah, they're really coming in now. Excellent. So I can see we have a lot of experts already on the sort of the best practices here for naming conventions. And I think you hit on all the excellent. Yes, easy to find, like the lowercase, no special characters. That's certainly a big one. So yeah, you guys have clearly been naming files all your life. Excellent. Only use underscores. All right. So I'm going to hop ahead here. So you guys have basically hit on the key components of all the three principles that we're recommending that people use when they name their files. So those three principles, as you can see there, are machine readable, then there's human readable, and plays well with default ordering. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what each of those mean. So first off, machine readable. What are we talking about there? So this is where things, as people mentioned, you want to avoid spaces, punctuation, strange sort of characters. You want to be careful about case sensitivity. And that's important for, as you can see, globbing and regular expression. I'll tell you a little bit more about what those are in just a second. So if those words are totally new to you, do not worry about that. And then the other component is, if they're easy, you want to make your files easy to compute on. And that involves the deliberate use of delimiters. And we'll also get into that, what that means in a little bit more detail. But what that alludes to is what I was talking about. You can actually use your file names to store relevant information that will, that can then be parsed out to make processing the data easier down the road. So what are we talking about with globs and regular expression? So basically what this is saying is that you want things that are easily to be searched and identified. So blobbing is talking about patterns where you're attempting to identify a collection or set of file names with using wildcard characters. So you might, even if you haven't done anything in terms of like R or Python using this, you may very well have employed even wildcard characters just in a Word document when you're trying to search for, anytime you use the, a root word with something appended on the end, whether it was, noun and verb form. So you can use the asterisk to identify any string characters. You use the question mark if you're looking for a particular string plus any other one additional character. And regular expression is very similar. So you should be learning more about this in upcoming sessions if this isn't familiar to you. But this is basically when you're using a search algorithm to do, as I said, something very similar, where you're looking for a particular set of characters that are going to define a set for the purposes of doing like a find or a find and replace. And so what does that mean in practice? Well, here is an example of a list of files. Just this is actually from the original talk that Jenny put together. I guess she did work on different types of assays. And so we can see here that there are two general types here that she's identified. She's got files that include assays that were done with plasmids versus the FFP eDNA, which is way outside of my wheelhouse when it comes to research, so I don't know what that stands for. But if you're looking at all these files and you want to just identify the ones with plasmid, if you've built that sort of metadata into your file name, then you can very quickly do that. So you can see there's a line of code there at the bottom in R that's just basically doing list the objects with the plasmid in it. I've highlighted that part in red. And so what that's going to do is it's going to extract out from that complete list of file names just the ones that are relevant based on that key term that you've searched for. So the useful thing about this is that it also plays well with Macs, which I have to take her word for it because I'm not a Mac user. I am a PC user. And in addition to that, so this is an example of basically doing the same thing with R. So you can see here that, again, we're trying to identify and pull out the files, the relevant files based on having been tagged in their name with this, this particular term.
Hey, Joel?
Yeah.
I'm not sure if this is happening for everyone, so feel free to pipe up if it's just me, but your sound is getting a little bit more garbled in the last minute or two. Do you mind maybe just holding the mic up to your mouth a little closer or something?
Sure.
Sorry.
It's probably.
And if it's just me, everybody feel free to shout me down in the chat, but it might be my internet.
How's this?
Much better, thank you.
Okay. I should use my little clip. It apparently was some tie interference. At least that's what I'm going to guess. Like I said, let that be just a general lesson to folks. Test out all the technical aspects before you're going to give a presentation. Don't just assume, oh, this headset will probably work as well as the next one. All right. So I'm going to advance here. So somebody had specifically called out underscore versus hyphens, I think, in the earlier chat. And so this is an example of what I was saying, where you can actually store essentially metadata about your files, about the data in the names. And so what they've done here is they're using the underscore versus the hyphen to designate sort of different parts of that name. Oh, and by one is put in a please don't use names like has in the name.ext as a general rule of thumb there as well. And so what I mean by extracting the metadata is, this is a little hard to see because the underscore doesn't show up very well, but basically what we're doing here is we are in the first line identifying, again, all of the particular files with this key term that we're looking for, so the plasmid assays. And then we can actually, we're breaking out the core components to each of those names for further use. So you can see that it's extracted the date, the fact that it's an assay, the sample set that I guess it was performed on, and the well. And so while these examples weren't R, the nice thing is that it's going to work across multiple systems, different programming languages. We already talked about how, you know, this isn't going to be a PC versus a Mac issue. And so as a general recommendation, what they, or what Jenny suggests is that you use the underscore to actually break out the sort of components of the metadata. So that would be the name versus the date. And then use the hyphen so that it can actually be parsed by human eyes, which kind of leads into our next part when we talk about making information that's also human readable as well as machine readable. Because, you know, the search algorithm doesn't care whether, you know, things are all running together or not. But if I, as a person, want to look at this and easily extract the information too, then it helps to have those delimiters there as well. Okay. So advantages, again, to having things that are machine readable, they're going to be easy to search later. You can very quickly identify your subsets within there. Again, you can actually extract information from the file names themselves. You don't necessarily have to keep going in there if you want to know, you know, the date that things were collected. If that date is built into the file name, then that's all the further you have to go. And then you can also split the information out as well. So if this is brand new to you, that is okay. In fact, now is a great time to start. We have some of our other examples in here that you guys already called out in the chat as well, in terms of you want to, it'll be easier if you avoid spaces, you want to avoid punctuation, you don't want to use the special characters, and sometimes capitalization matters, so make sure that you're being consistent in terms of how you name things using your capital versus lowercase. So as a general rule, I think somebody had suggested, you know, just all doing lowercase. I mean, if that is the rule that your team adopts from the outset, then this isn't going to be a problem. Okay, and then as I mentioned, the other side of being machine readable, it also helps to make these things human readable. And so as you can see there, and as we've already talked about, there's actual information that is useful to you as a user stored in the names. This ties into the concept of a slug from semantic URLs. You can see there. So I'm not going to actually follow the URL, but if you want to read more on that, you can get that from the presentation, which is loaded into the Teams already under the all training folder under today's date. And so this is a little circular, but a slug basically refers to the part of a URL that is human readable. And so the history lesson, it comes from, you know, news media. They originally, you know, developed this terminology for internal use is just a quick and easy way of identifying what the file, well, they would be talking about news stories, obviously, but in our case, it's what is the file used for? And I think here's probably the best example to drive that home. So if you're anything like me, you come back to a project after a little bit of time away, it's not always immediately clear what you were doing with all of the material you put together. So if we look at these two sets of files there, which one, if you're sitting down before a deadline, you haven't looked at this in a while, which one of these two is going to more immediately tell you, okay, what was I doing here? What is the purpose of each of these files? How do they relate to one another? What order do they need to be run in? And I guess this is a little rhetorical because I feel like based on everything I've just said, it hopefully is obvious that the one on the left is more informative and probably more useful for jumping immediately back into a project, sort of immediately refreshing you as a human user as to what you were doing. And so here we've just highlighted that you can see actually in the names again, there's information that tells us both which file contains the data, which ones contains analyses that are being conducted. And so even, me not having any sense of what this actual data set was being used for, I can look at this and get a sense of what the individual components are. Because again, these are not actually my examples. So I'm just impressed that myself that it works and that I have a sense of what's happening here. I think Aaron really liked the embrace the slug, so I've left that part here. Okay. Finally, we've got the last component here, which just plays well with the default ordering. So the first 2 points there are general best practices that I would strongly encourage you to adopt no matter what else you do. The last one is probably, again, going to be context dependent. So it's going to depend on what you're doing with your project and how your team best thinks everything should be put together. I'll just walk through some quick examples of that as well, or all three of these. So when we say plays well with default ordering, we just mean that you want to structure your files in such a way that, kind of related to the human readable example, they're going to be ordered in a logically consistent manner so that you can see either the application order that they need to be run in or the order in which data sets were collected. And so we have 2 examples here, one organized chronologically by date, so you're leading with the date at the front of those. The other one is the logical order, so it's more about the steps of the process that you're employing as you go through here. And so you have something numeric kind of first in both examples. Obviously, the logical order has called out the fact that you have helper versus the main components. And our chronological order is following the standard for dates here. And I think we've got a real quick history lesson on that from XKCD, which is just a funny comic about math and coding and social sciences and life in general. If you haven't had a reason to check it out. All right. And here is just a graph of American exceptionalism. So here are all the places that use a date format other than the one that we're recommending. And so, yeah, so if you want to be able to talk to and collaborate with other people from other places, taking into account, sort of cultural differences and some of those things that came up yesterday again in the team science talk, this is another good reason why you probably want to stick with the date format that we're recommending. All right, when you're putting numbers in front of your files for other logical orders, though, you definitely want to left pad other numbers with 0. And what that means is that that if it's just 1 or 2, then you're just leading with 0, 1, 0, 2. And so you can see that that's highlighted there. You might be asking yourself, well, why is that important? And so this, I got to give credit to Neil for. He provided a good example that I think can drive home things as to the value of left pads. So here we have a bunch of episodes from a television show that is not real. But if you want to make sure you're not spoiling things for yourself, then you definitely want to left pad it so when it is sorted, it falls into a logical order. I have a question here. Can't hear.
Yeah. I can hear. It's, yeah. Sorry, Chase, you may need to try dialing into the audio. I can try and send you that dial-in info.
I can try repositioning the mic again, just in case it's not still not picked up that well. But yeah, I guess let's take a minute here. Does anyone else need the audio line as well? Okay, well, I'm not seeing anybody else mentioning that in chat, so hopefully that means we've only had that one case. So I got some final recommendations here for just naming things very broadly. So if you are employing a logical order, one thing I recommend is building in some flexibility or room to grow, because the last thing you want to do is find out that, after you've built out all your steps that you're going to be following, you need to go back and reinsert something in a way that's going to make you essentially have to rename a bunch of files. So I've thrown an example here just in terms of the sort of research project that we're following. So a lot of people are going to be leading with the literature review. You're going to put those all in, a folder you label 01. Name your next thing with enough room that when you realize, oh man, I forgot, we actually need to go and find some data that we can perform the analysis on, then it's easy to fit that in without having to change things around. And then also, please, for the love of everything that's important, if you're going to do things where you're going to have multiple versions and you're going to need to track version control, please put those on the any kind of designation for that on the right. Because otherwise, going back, it's a similar problem to when you don't left pad. If you are tracking your versions on the left-hand side of things and you go to order, you're going to get things like unhappy skull is highlighting down there. And so some of you might be thinking to yourself, man, why would he even feel the need to mention that? And this, I'm going to point out, is another one of those examples of why you want to sit down with everybody and talk about that at the outset, because you don't know what other people's experiences or expectations are coming in. And so even things that seem very sort of fundamentally obvious to you might not be the way that other people are used to doing them. So better to get that all out on the table up front, so you don't get halfway through a project and realize, oh wait, you've been putting those things on the left. That's not going to work. And that is based on a true story. Okay. So here we just have a reminder about the three components of playing well with default ordering. And then a reminder here as well about the three broad principles for file names. So again, machine readable, human readable plays well with the default ordering. And by now you've probably seen how a lot of these things just kind of flow together. And by doing one, you're also making the other two, you're also achieving, I should say, the other two. So the great thing about a project like this is that this is the outset for everyone. Everyone is getting into this now, so that makes it an easy time to implement these kind of things. And even if you're brand new to doing this kind of work in terms of a data science environment, that's fine. In fact, that's great, because the skills that you're developing now, these rules of thumb that you're learning to implement now, they're going to make it easier and pay off down the road as your skills continue to evolve and you get better at this. All right, I think what I will do is pause for a minute in case anybody has any questions, or if anybody wants to throw out any kinds of other sort of best practices, rule of thumb, things that tricks of the trade that they've picked up that they found useful when it comes to naming things. All right, well, I'm going to take it from the silence and the lack of things in chat to mean that you have been thoroughly blown away and now know everything you need to know about why and how we should name things. So let's talk a little bit about coding standards, which are sort of conceptually very similar and for similar reasons. So again, oh, thank you. I see a comment from Andrew. So the information that I'm going to highlight here comes from the Tidyverse guide that Hadley Wickham's put together. And so generally speaking, you should read it because it's very good. It's very comprehensive. It's going to cover a lot more information than what I have time to point out right here. So I'm just going to highlight some things as they relate to naming stuff, because that's kind of my bag on this one. But like I said, there's a ton more stuff in there, and it's going to be useful to you just more generally speaking as you work through the projects. So at the outset of his style guide, Hadley writes this long quote that I don't necessarily need to read to you. But the thing that I wanted to highlight is that he's calling this out for, I think, essentially the same reason that I am here. But again, that the style guide, as like all these things, are fundamentally opinions, but the value that you get from them is that they provide consistency. And so in his case, he's talking mostly about individuals across projects. But as I keep harping on, we're talking about establishing a consistency across the team on a project. And the fact that he said that he's saying the same thing that other people are saying, I feel like is good evidence for the value of why you should be looking to apply these kind of rules. So a lot of the stuff that he has to say when it comes to files are the same kind of things that we already talked about that came from Jenny's talk. But he also had a recommendation that I thought was interesting and worth calling out here, that his suggestion is not sort of appending things to the end of files that if you realize you made a mistake. So his recommendation is at that point, if you realize that you need to implement a new sort of convention to how you've organized this, how you've named it, then it's just best to go back and rename everything. And this is why I would argue that building yourself in some flexibility is so key, because if you've anticipated that things may change or may not play out exactly the way you have, then hopefully you're ready to accommodate those changes without having to go back and spend that extra time. But also calling out the fact that it's hard to know exactly what you're going to need at the outset. So it just takes time and practice to get these kinds of things right. So when you're dealing with syntax, as you'll get into, a couple other good rules to use here are same principles, using the lowercase numbers more consistently, numbers and the underscore. One of the things that I do want to highlight here is you'll notice that when we're talking about the actual sort of code itself, so we have syntax, we're talking about variable names, you're going to see there that the advice differs slightly from the idea of naming sort of your larger files, the folders, the sort of the organizational structure of that, because there you don't necessarily want a bunch of extra information. You want to aim for being clear and concise and relatively short to serve your purposes there. So these things aren't universally applicable across every step. So I got a little bit ahead of myself there, but so he points out that, again, don't try to cram too much of that metadata into the actual objects names themselves. Again, metadata, great on that larger file folder organizational structure level, not so great when you're actually dealing with variables that are sort of being manipulated within the individual data. Some other general rules: don't use the names of things that already exist within these packages that you're using. That is just going to make your life more complicated, and it's going to make, again, the lives of everyone else who's attempting to use the code that you're putting together more complicated. So we got some again with functions, general advice, again, being short, concise, to the point, and using verbs, which kind of follow from the conceptual level, what the functions are being used for, because they're doing things, and so you have the type of word that describes doing things applied to them. And so last note, just again, this is related to files, but a lot of the things that you're going to be doing involve pulling in other packages. And so you just, this is a word of advice, a cautionary note, just sort of keep in mind how all of those things are related, so that similar to why you don't want to rename functions that already have a name for use somewhere else, it's going to become difficult to track how everything relates if you haven't thought about, sort of, again, conceptually, how the different packages are being pulled into the larger project that you're working on. So that brings us to the end of my prepared notes. I'm going to hop over here and stop sharing. And yeah, we'll take a minute to digest. If anybody has any questions, feel free to either throw those into chat or just hop on the audio. Also, we have some time if you want to share, again, advice that you have from projects you've worked on in the past, things that you've run into that worked or didn't work.
Joel, the only thing I can add here maybe is that I typically use the date format that goes year, month, day, but I think that might be more relevant for projects that span multiple years, and maybe is not as relevant for projects that are only going to have the scope, like time duration of the summer.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, we obviously are sort of working on a time-limited projects here. We've just got the 10 weeks essentially. So there is a good chance that the logical order is going to make more sense for people in terms of how they structure their information.
I think Ellen has a question about UVA deviations from the Tidyverse style guide. There are, to my knowledge, the main deviation from the Tidyverse style guide is that Vicky hates Tidyverse. So if you're on a team with Vicky, Ellen, or anyone from the UVA team, just know that she does not love Tidyverse, but that should not stop you from using Tidyverse. She's not on the right side of history with that. So she prefers base R for everything.
I feel like that's shots fired, Devika.
Listen, she has told me many times she'd rather go back to C, and that's clearly not the direction that we're heading. So no, the Tidyverse style guide is definitely the one to follow. And you may find yourself in the position of teaching it to other people.
So yeah, broadly speaking, we're following it. It may vary on a case-by-case basis. So again, another reason to talk to the rest of the folks and just make sure everybody is on the same page in case your, project supervisor has different thoughts. In which case, sometimes, particularly given the limited time frame and the crunch that a lot of people will be under, it may just be easier at that point to sort of follow their lead.